Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka from our studios here in London. Coming up on today's show, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has named Grant Shapps as the UK's new Defence Secretary following yesterday morning's resignation of Ben Wallace. Shapps' appointment will not change Britain's support for Ukraine against Russia, but given the tense geopolitical landscape, there are concerns among some Conservative MPs about the former Energy Minister's lack of military experience. Our business correspondent Simon Pusey will soon be joining me for some reactions. And the ousting of President Ali Bongo from resource-rich Gabon is the 8th coup in former French colonies in Africa in the past 3 years. The military takeover has sparked a slump in the nation's dollar bonds and has raised concerns of a spillover of the sell-off to other African countries with high political risk. Africa analyst Tamzin Kujo and John Essin, founder of the global strategist Peace Initiative, will shortly be joining me with their assessment on these deeply troubling developments. Then later, I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business news stories of the week. But first, the Nigerian government is extending an invitation to globally renowned scientists of Nigerian heritage to collaborate with them in the formulation of its national artificial intelligence strategy. According to a post published on X, formerly known as Twitter, by Bosun Tijani, the Minister of Communications, Innovation and Digital Economy, the partnership will positively impact the way Nigeria formulates new technological solutions for critical national challenges. As reported in a recent study by PricewaterhouseCoopers, artificial intelligence could contribute $15.7 trillion to the global economy by 2030. On Wednesday, the UK's Foreign Secretary James Cleverly held talks with Chinese officials in Beijing, the first such visit in 5 years. The war in Ukraine, human rights and cybersecurity made up most of the discourse, which has faced criticism from some senior Conservatives. Former Tory leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith compared the government's approach to the appeasement of Nazi Germany in the 1930s. During a face-to-face meeting with Vice President Han Zheng, Cleverly said regular meetings between the two nations would be important to enhance understanding and to avoid misunderstanding. On Thursday, the UK Prime Minister announced Grant Shapps as the country's new Defence Secretary. The appointment comes after Ben Wallace revealed last month he would be leaving the role the next time Rishi Sunak made changes to his cabinet. Shapps had been serving as the Energy, Security and Net Zero Secretary before his promotion to the Ministry of Defence. Well, for more on this, I was earlier joined in the studio by our business correspondent, Simon Pusey. Okay, so Simon, Ben Wallace, longest-serving Conservative Defence Secretary out. Grant Shapps, pretty familiar face, is in. No military background. What does this say about Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's intentions as we are heading into a general election?
Yeah, so Ben Wallace, 4 years in the job. And if you talk about the current context of how long ministers tend to stay, that's a long, long time, especially for this government where we've seen a lot of coming and going. Also, good to point out that he's really sort of loved across Europe and especially in Ukraine, because he's been the one that's been leading the charge for Ukraine and really sort of heading the UK's response, which is, as we know, has been sort of ahead of the rest of Europe really in terms of weapons. We were giving Ukraine weapons and training a long time before other European countries, and we're very much a sort of front runner in that. So I think Ukraine and Zelensky really liked Ben Wallace. So Grant Shapps, as you said, well, he's pledged to continue the UK support for Ukraine, so they'll be happy about that. He takes over as Defence Secretary, as you say, from Ben Wallace, and partly due to the fact that Ben Wallace was supposed to follow Jens Stoltenberg as the NATO Secretary General. Right. That is something that America kind of blocked. Joe Biden kind of blocked for many different reasons. People saying that, that it needed to be a European person. The EU was not going to back this. Maybe it needed to be a woman. Maybe it needed to be someone who, basically wasn't a Brit. So I think that's partly why Ben Wallace is stepping down, is because he had thought for a long time that he was going to get this role, especially after his efforts in Ukraine. That caused a bit of a rift between the US and the UK and Biden and Rishi Sunak. But interesting to see our old friend Boris saying, sad to see the departure of my friend Ben Wallace, a fine Defence Secretary who got many calls right, especially in Ukraine. Grant Shapps is an excellent choice to succeed him. So that's interesting that Boris Johnson is sort of backing Rishi Sunak for once on his choice. And let's talk a bit about Grant Shapps. He's this is his fifth cabinet role in a year, just a year. So he's a safe pair of hands. He's been at the top of the Conservative Party for many years now. He can do an interview. He comes across as quite likable. Basically, across his brief, he doesn't really put his foot in it really too often. And I think a lot of people are saying he's a good caretaker minister. So I don't think people are thinking he's going to be in this role for a long time. Obviously, there's a general election around the corner, which many people think the Conservatives aren't going to win. Even if they do, then there'll be another reshuffle and people will be in different positions. So I think this is kind of, safe from Rishi Sunak, really playing it safe. Like, there's no one's going to get too upset about this. I think Grant Shapps doesn't really have much experience within defence and militarily. He doesn't have a background like Ben Wallace did.
But great at spinning.
Exactly. He's very good at kind of holding the fort. But, as we were talking about earlier, there's a lot of things going on in the world which the UK, defence ministry need to get their head around. Of course, there's Ukraine. There's a lot of things happening in Africa at the moment, which, the UK are involved in. So it's not something you can just come in and be plain sailing. It's always moving. It's very dynamic, this role. But, it's his fifth in a year, so he's had experience of quickly picking up a brief and rolling with it. Also worth pointing out that the Children's Minister, Claire Coutinho, has replaced Grant Shapps as Energy and Security Minister. She's only 38. She's the youngest cabinet minister and is very in the Rishi Sunak mold. She's comes from Merrill Lynch. She was part of the 2019 intake, so she's very new, very green, but probably her and Rishi have quite a lot in common, and so he's sort of promoted her. She's only the youngest cabinet minister. So, I mean, in terms of government reshuffles, it's not a huge one. We're not seeing lots of people coming and going. We knew Ben Wallace was going to step down because he told us already. But it's interesting to see Grant Shapps coming in. Interesting to see how he'll do, because as until now, there's never been really any huge gaffes from him. But I think a lot of people will be looking to see that he does back up what he said, that he will continue the UK's support for Ukraine, which under Ben Wallace was huge and, was really leading the rest of the world in support for Ukraine. So it'll be interesting if Grant Shapps does continue that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you.
The military takeover of the OPEC member state Gabon has drawn condemnation from the US, Nigeria, France and the African Union. Over the past few days, the nation's dollar bonds have slumped and there are major concerns of a spillover of the sell-off to other African countries with high political risk. According to the World Bank, about 1/3 of Gabon's population live below the poverty line. This is despite an abundance of manganese deposits and other natural resources. Well, for more on this, I was earlier joined in the studio by Africa analyst Tamzan Kajo. Tamzan Kajo, as always, thank you so much for your time. Another week, another coup. President Ali Bongo Ondimba is out. Your thoughts, please.
Well, thank you for having me, Juliana. Well, it's part of what we were predicting, isn't it? When we were talking about what's happening within Francophone Africa, and where you see administrations that are traditionally seen to be very close to Paris, and not necessarily working for the local interests, being overthrown. And of course, I think the method appears to be the same, where those that are taking over from the military say that they are going to guarantee the safety of whoever they are disposing. So what's happening to President Ali Bongo is not so much of a surprise. And you would have seen that the reaction from the world appears to confirm that at some point, something like this was expected.
Can you explain to our viewers exactly the makeup, the shape of Gabon? Can you talk to us about the Bongo family? This, of course, isn't ECOWAS, although, as to be expected, there is a lot of anxiety, I would say, not just in the west of Africa, but particularly in Nigeria. But explain Gabon to us if you can.
So if you are Nigerian, you would think of probably something, a state like Nasarawa. You've got Cameroon, and then immediately after Cameroon, which is also oil rich, you now have Gabon. So Cameroon and Gabon are not too different, and Gabon is just close to the Congo. So you've got Congo, Brazzaville next door.
So we'd say Central Africa.
It is technically Central Africa, but it's just on the edge of ECOWAS because it's just next to Cameroon. It is oil rich in terms of forestry because it is just next to the Congo. An extension, if you were in America, it would be an extension of the Amazon, the other side. So it is a country that is very important in terms of biodiversity. That's why the conference was there, Macron was there, a lot of leaders were there just in March, because there's a lot that is going on there. It is very rich in oil, but small relatively in terms of population, just about 2.5 million people or so, but very, very close to France. The complexion of it, if you want to describe it like that, politically, it is not different from most of the Francophone Africa. You had independence in 1960, and then you had Léon Mba, who was the president then. He was president for about 7 years or so. So Omar Bongo, the Bongo senior, then became the deputy or vice president to Léon Mba when Léon Mba was unwell in about 1966, 1967. And then when Léon Mba died, then Omar Bongo took over. He was very young then. He was about 32 or so. And then he stayed on for from 1967 until
2023.
No, until 2009,
yes,
when he died. So when he died, Ali Bongo or Alain then took over. So Alain is the son to Omar Bongo. But most of the politics in Gabon post-independence is related to Omar Bongo, who was the father to the president who has just been deposed.
Is it fair to say that the response has been quite lukewarm from the West? Of course, they're criticising it. I know that Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, he spoke to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, I believe, on Wednesday night, offering some sort of support or advice for ECOWAS or AU. I want to talk about President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Should he be afraid? What is the position Nigeria should be taking? They appear to be surrounded by military junta. This has got to be a pretty frightening period at the moment.
I'm not sure if it is frightening, but I think what President Tinubu needs to do as the leader of ECOWAS is to acknowledge that there is transition that's going on.
Right.
And then they need to, I think what ECOWAS needs to do under his leadership is to be proactive.
Is ECOWAS proactive at the moment?
I would like to believe that diplomatically there is something that they are doing. Because France has already realized that it's losing the grip.
Yeah.
France has got army bases in those countries. They are having problems with Niger. Gabon is a bit different because Gabon was already, Ali Bongo was already trying to move away from Paris. That's why they joined the Commonwealth, because they wanted to move away from the influence of the French. The Russians were having some interest, the Chinese were having interest. So Gabon is slightly different from what we saw in Niger and other places. But Gabon was also still having uranium that is available for the West, in addition to the oil and all the other wealth that people are talking about. But I think ECOWAS and President Tinubu in particular, they need to be proactive. They need to begin to talk to the people in Cameroon. They need to talk to people in Senegal. They need to talk to the people in Cote d'Ivoire and understand the dynamics and probably come to some political settlements where most of these countries were already trying to move away. Remember when they wanted to have that common currency and all that? They were already trying to move away from the influence of post-colonial relationships that they had with Paris. So I believe that the only way out is if there is some sort of conference where ECOWAS can discuss how to respond and how to reassure those nations that are not yet in the hands of the military, and also to probably midwife the process of democratization or the return to civilian rule within these other countries without threatening Niger. This is why when I was talking to you last time, I was doubting that there was ever going to be military intervention in Niger. That would have been disaster. That would have been the wrong decision. It doesn't need a military solution. It needs a political solution that is based on the realization that since 1960, when most of these countries became independent, most of the people locally, whether it's Niger, Gabon, Cameroon, or whatever, they were not in control. Yeah. They felt that France was benefiting from their own resources.
Coming up on Channel's Business Global, we'll be staying with this developing story in Gabon. And to help me do that, I'll be joined by lawyer and founder of the Global Strategist Peace Initiative, John Essin. I'll also be looking back at some of the biggest business news stories of the week. All of this after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a moment, I'll be speaking with the founder of the Global Strategist Peace Initiative, John Essin. But until then, here's a breakdown of the biggest business news stories of the week. The Bank of England's chief economist has warned interest rates will need to stay higher for longer as the bank battles to bring down inflation. Hugh Pill says more pain is on the way as the full impact of higher borrowing costs has yet to be felt by households and businesses. Since December 2021, the MPC has raised rates at every meeting, bringing them from a record low of 0.1% to 5.25%. Financial markets expect another increase to 5.5% in September. New Zealand has introduced legislation that enables a digital services tax on large multinational companies. The announcement follows a 2021 agreement among more than 140 countries about overhauling decades-old rules on taxing multinationals to ensure digital firms like Apple and Amazon pay their fair share. The proposed 3% levy will be imposed in 2025 on businesses that make over 750 million euros a year from global digital services. Apple's iPhone 14 Pro Max was the best-selling device on the market in the first half of this year, according to data released by research firm Omdia. Between January to June, 26.5 million units of the device were sold, compared with 21 million unit shipments for the iPhone 14 Pro. Apple accounted for all four of the top shipping models, with the Samsung Galaxy A14 coming in fifth place. Devices from Chinese manufacturers did not feature in the top 10 best shipping smartphones. Now return to the developing situation in Gabon. The sub-Saharan nation is an important member of the OPEC grouping, producing 181,000 barrels of crude oil a day. If Wednesday's coup proves to be a success, it would represent a dramatic end to the Bongo family's grip over this oil-rich but poverty-stricken state. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by John Essin. He's a lawyer and the founder of the Global Strategist Peace Initiative. John Essin, it's a pleasure having you on Channel's Business Global today. Let's just have your general reacts to what's taking place in Gabon and in the wider region.
Thank you for having me, Juliana. It's good to be here. It's been a while. It wasn't really surprising, but I don't think he should have gone when he did. I think despite Gabon not being part of the ECOWAS bloc, the response of the Nigerian president, who is incidentally chair of currently the chair of ECOWAS, his response to the coup in Niger, I think, informed the decision for the coup plotters to go ahead and overthrow the democratically elected government in Gabon. He made two strategic blunders. The first was to issue an ultimatum, which gave Gabon the time to think about how to go about dethrowing their government. And the other was not securing domestic support with the Senate, with the Nigerian Senate, with the leaders of the hierarchy of Muslims in the north and Christians in the south. They all kicked against his going into Niger. And the Gabon, seeing that, thought this is just as good a time as any to go into Gabon if they were going to take the government out, because the father had been there and now the son in a total of 56 years. And he had another 7-year term to go that he just won. And he wasn't fit. I think he had a stroke and he wasn't really fit to rule. So I thought they just thought that was the opportunity to remove him. Because even though they're not a member of the ECOWAS, but that informed a broader response of how the AU, the African Union, would have reacted.
Okay, you've opened a can of worms there, John, particularly when it comes to President Tinubu. We will come back to that, but I do want to talk about Ali Bongo. I did get to meet him when he was in London last year. There was a ceremony where Gabon was officially accepted into the Commonwealth. And I've got to agree with you. He did look pretty poorly at the time, although I have spoken to some members of the team who insist that he did recover in terms of his health. Now, Wednesday morning, we got the information about the junta in Gabon. Thursday morning, some breaking news out of London was that the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, was resigning with immediate effect. Grant Shapps has taken over. What sort of response would we expect from Britain? Do they have the power and the capacity to respond? I believe that the Prime Minister, we know the Prime Minister of Canada has been in touch with the President of ECOWAS. Will we be expecting a similar call from Rishi Sunak or Grant Shapps into Nigeria?
I think the West is supporting Tinubu because he's a newly elected president. So I think the blunder with issuing that ultimatum must have been the advice from, I'm suspecting, will have been an advice from the West. But even that made things worse, because when you issue an ultimatum, it is to establish deterrence for potential culprits or perpetrators. But because he didn't follow that through, the first cardinal rule in diplomatic engagement is you never issue an ultimatum or make a promise that you're not prepared to follow through. Because if you don't, then it leaves you open and you'll be looking for an off-ramp to come off. He got himself into...
Absolutely. It's easy to talk about the blunders, isn't it, John? And it's always easy to kind of throw the tomatoes. What is the solution?
I think the solution is still a diplomatic solution. But I think that ECOWAS has locked itself into a corner. It's looking for an off-ramp because it came back on the 10th of August to make a statement. It actually spoke from either side of his mouth. On the one hand, it said that it had activated a force. It had activated a standby force. Now, it takes a lot to put a force together to marshal a military force for such a purpose, because the time, the planning, even the logistics to transfer any force from where it is to where it needs to be is a lot. And it doesn't have a reaction force, a rapid reaction force like the Western countries have, like this country has, for instance, or France or the United States. And since they didn't offer that, he should not have gone ahead and said that, because Nigeria does not have the capacity to go into Niger anyway.
We don't have the capacity, as you may say. You believe that there was a few political blunders. We have and we continue to send a peaceful delegation into Niger. Those communication channels are still open. But before we, whilst we shouldn't kind of dig into the blunders and what has gone wrong, what do you think is likely to happen next? Twitter, formerly Twitter, X, is awash with kind of anxiety about what could happen in Cameroon. Do you think we could potentially be seeing something similar? How does one prevent that?
Oh, I can see why we may suspect that the same thing might happen in Cameroon. But the Cameroonian leader has been there, I can't remember, I think he's in his 90s. And I suspect that the Cameroonians are just waiting maybe for him to die so they can carry on. I don't think we are likely to see that. It would make any sense anyway, given his age and how long he has. So I think that the Cameroonians are just waiting to see him out before they make the changes they need to make. So that's unlikely to happen in the Cameroons now.
John Essin, lawyer and founder of the Global Strategist Peace Initiative. Really, really insightful having you on the show today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Juliana.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today. But as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.